Welcome to the February 22nd City Council work session. And the first order of business, it will be to refer back to the motion that is on the table that is amended. And so I'm going to turn this over to...
It is not amended. What's on the table is Alan's original
motion is on the table.
Right, and this
The
would be-
original motion is on the table and discussion of that motion.
Correct.
Okay. And George, do you want to clarify what the...
Sure, I'll go ahead and address that.
Thank you.
After our meeting the other day, I found out that the lottery-backed bond funds are actually paid back by the Lottery Commission before any of the other lottery funds are dispersed. And what I've done is I've got a proposed amended, I guess, motion. And basically it's using the point out the two differences in the two resolutions. As I move to A, amend the title of the resolution so that it reads as follows. A resolution supporting Eugene Civic Alliance's proposal and efforts to seek state funding and private funding to support revitalization of the former Civic Stadium site. And B, amend section 1 of the resolution, add sections 2 and 3, and renumber section 2 to section 4, so that those sections read as follows. Do I need to read the?
As submitted?
You don't have to.
Okay.
You can just say as presented.
As presented.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. The major difference in the proposed amendment that I've got out is the City Council, it reads section 1, the City Council supports the proposal of Eugene Civic Alliance to seek state funding from the 2017 Oregon Legislature and its efforts to seek private funding to help finance its revitalization efforts of the former Civic Stadium site. The landscape plan and design and construction budget for the project are attached as exhibits A and B respectively. The City Council, section 2, the City Council encourages the Oregon Legislature to consider funding support for Eugene Civic Alliance revitalization of the former Civic Stadium site while maintaining current video lottery proceeds for local economic development. And then the City Council directs the City Manager to send a copy of this resolution to Governor Kate Brown and the state legislative delegation. And the reason why I worded it that way, again, like I said, is that any lottery-backed bond funds are in fact paid back before the money is dispersed to the different agencies that use it. I personally think that the Civic Alliance's proposal is an outstanding project. I'm just a little concerned about using the lottery-backed bond funds. $6 million has never been used before, and although there are no current conflicts, the potential conflicts that may arise out of doing this are unknown and could be catastrophic to any organization that is using the lottery funds for economic development, both schools, parks, and economic development. So I think this gives the support. It's in line with the city, or I'm sorry, with the Board of Commissioners, and basically what Mayor Lundberg has said to us, both Alan and I, based on Alan's email.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess I'm entirely in favor of the idea of us being supportive of their effort to seek these bonds in the absence of it having any other consequences to any of our local efforts. And I don't happen to know, so maybe this is where my question comes in for the presenter of the motion. I don't happen to know if bond funds are allocated or bond authority is allocated regionally or in such a way at the legislature where it tends to be, so as it might cause an issue versus some other potential project. number one. And number two, I don't think it does, but I would want to know for sure that it doesn't decrease with its repayment of those bonds, regular funding from lottery proceeds that go to previously existing things. For example, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the county commissioners use to a large extent lottery funding and room tax and other such things to be able to pay the contract on Travel Lane County. And as a result, if a chunk of lottery money went away from county because it wasn't available at the state, then we would be putting Travel Lane County in jeopardy. So I just want to make sure that there aren't unanticipated consequences, but in the abstract, I'm happy to support it. Can you address either of those, anyone?
I don't know how the lottery funding program works, so
My understanding is that that wouldn't affect those, that there are no current local government conflicts, and that the only other, and there are project monies and other monies that pay for, like Travel Lane County, that are separate, and that the only other local potential application for lottery funds is from the Eugene Ballet, in the tune of $250,000 to $500,000 yet, and the Civic Alliance actually supports that application. And those two applications would then be, they're not regionally set out, they're statewide, and that they would be in competition with projects from Portland. And so basically, if they don't give it to us, then it'll go to Portland. That's the way I understand it.
I know there's a cap. Do you happen to know what the cap is for authority and where this fits within that as a scope or a percentage?
Particular detail.
Claire?
Yeah. I just was.
So I just have a question for the city attorney in terms of these two drafts of this resolution, the one that Councilor Zelenka put forward originally and the modified proposal by Councilor Poling. In your mind, is there a substantive difference between them in terms of what they're communicating and their legal effect?
the original one, and you can see it in the title, is supporting the allocation of $6 million in lottery-backed bonds. The alternative, the one that George just offered, supports funding without saying it necessarily should be the lottery-backed bonds. So that's, to me, the primary difference.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? George?
My understanding is that the lottery takes and repays all of its bond money before it disperses its money. So any bonds that are paid back, it's going to affect the total amount given to any agency that relies on lottery funds. And all this is doing is saying we support the Eugene Civic Alliance going for state funding. We support the project. It's just that we don't necessarily support the idea of using the lottery-backed bonds because we don't know what's going to happen if they are used. And I just think we need to protect that so the economic development, the schools and parks that use the lottery funds are not impacted.
So the original motion is basically presented an option that requested one kind of funding, one source, one method. What I think Councilor Poling is recommending is that we change that to say all avenues are open except video lottery, because video lottery is used for other things. If that's what I'm reading in Section 2, while maintaining current video lottery proceeds for local economic development. That would sound like that money is already allocated and we want to continue to maintain that allocation. But that all other lottery funds or other funds, so in other words, it expands the pool of opportunities for money with one exception, whereas this one was only one option. Now there's many options with one exception. It sounds like that's the principal difference between the two.
Right. And our endorsement of the project is go seek funding, but don't go, we're asking them not to go seek funding. We don't support the use of lottery funds.
Yeah. One thing that goes with that whenever you pass a resolution is
Video lottery.
Yeah, video lottery funds, exactly. One of the things that goes along with that is whenever you make any kind of a resolution, that's nice, but resolutions are, only as good as the amount of effort you put into advancing them. And so what I like is you adding this section 3 that says we will send a copy of this to the governor and to our state delegation so they'll be aware of what our position is with regard to support for Civic Stadium. But it would be also nice if we did a bit of an effort to say we think this is an extremely important civic project, and so we have specifically crafted something that says you can look under every rock and in every corner of the state budget to try to find money to support this project that we think is very important. To me, that would be something that would go with this resolution to provide some additional support rather than say it's $6 million of this kind of money or oops, yeah, we don't have it. It's wherever you can find the money. And so what I would like to see is us put some effort into trying to lobby or advance this project as a good community regional project in whatever way we could do that. So I would want to see that go along with this. I can support these amendments, but I'd like to see us put some effort behind it as well.
Betty?
Thank you. I think this is much more important than contributing to economic development. Actually, it would be economic development, but I think I prefer to leave it the resolution as it was originally. Thank you.
Emily?
With the amendments, well, first of all, I don't want to take lottery money from anything else, so I agree with the reason for changing it. But I'm wondering what effect this has. We make a lot of resolutions, and this is saying, this is important to us, please look for money, whereas before we had, it seemed to me, asked the question, will you give us this $6 million from this fund? So it's really a different question. I'm more in support of the amendment, but I wonder, is it really going to help?
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I was just going to say in response to what Chris mentioned, I'm sure if this resolution in this fashion passes, you're correct, it'll go directly as notification to those listed. But I know, too, that the manager in his effectiveness and his work will make sure that our city lobbyist is aware of the council's resolution, as will George and Betty and I, sitting on IGR, be able to have a direct contact with our intergovernmental relations guy in Salem to be able to follow up, too, and ask the question, how is that proceeding through the legislature?
Claire?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Councilor Taylor. I prefer the original motion. I think it's more emphatic. I'm not as concerned about competing with other local economic development dollars. I don't think that's an issue. Plus, I do agree that if we were to develop this stadium, it is exactly the kind of economic development work that I think these funds are intended to go towards. And I believe the original request from the Civic Alliance was to support specifically this request of lottery-backed bond funds. And so I'm inclined to support the original motion.
Okay. Any other discussion? Alan?
So, Emily, to your point, the project's going to stand on its own merits and in competition with other projects that are requesting funds from the lottery, and they're going to put in an application for $6 million. So, and having support for the project from the local governments is kind of icing on the cake, and Lane County's in support for the project, and this supports the project, and Mayor Lundberg personally, not the council, supported the project, and they've got lots of other support from local community members that are being sent in. So to the degree that all that adds up to a good project, it does make a difference. With regard to the amendments, I prefer the original one because I put it forward, and it was the request by the Civic Alliance. But I'm not sure, and given the fact that the commissioners did something similar, and the Civic Alliance is okay with that letter of support, and also with Mayor Lundberg's personal support, which is a similar type of letter without stating the amount, or where the proceeds are coming from. I'd prefer the original one, so I won't support the amendment, but if the amendment's passed, I think this is fine to sit forward.
George?
Yeah, I would just like to point out that the Board of Commissioners letter specifically states, we appreciate the budget challenges the legislature is facing and encourages you to consider funding support for this project while maintaining current video lottery proceeds for the local economic development. They are enthusiastic supporters of the project and seeking state funding, but not using the video lottery proceeds, and that's exactly what I'm doing with my proposed motion.
Yeah.
Got Emily over here.
Where she is.
Oh, Emily?
Do we have to do the whole amendment? Because I would like to add maintaining the current video lottery, if that's possible, with the $6 million ask.
We get
Yeah,
there.
that becomes,
So you can, I mean, the council can vote on George's amendment. If that fails, you could certainly offer a new amendment that would add language to the original resolution.
okay, so now the process here is we still have the original on the table, or do we vote on the? We're now voting on the amendment, so we're voting, so are we ready to vote? Okay, all in favor of the proposed amended motion? All in favor? 1, 2, 3. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay,
Now we're back.
so now we're back to the main
I
motion.
would like to make a proposed amendment.
Okay,
So I move that we add the language to protect the video lottery money for further economic development to the original.
we have a second for that? Okay, all right, discussion? Mike?
I need more specifics about what you mean. Do you mean his preamble? George's
I mean,
preamble?
in section 2, where it says, while maintaining current
Okay.
video
So you're-
proceeds, that's all I want.
You're moving his whole section 2 or just that sentence?
Just that phrase, I guess.
Okay.
I just want to protect the video
Okay.
lottery proceeds for local economic development. That's
Okay.
all I'm asking.
You're adding that to section 1.
does
You're adding it to section 1 because there is no section 2 now.
Yeah.
It does the same.
Wherever it fits.
And if you keep talking, I will have specific language for you in just a moment.
Okay, good, perfect. Yeah, Alan, let's see. Yeah,
It
Alan.
allows them.
And then, Emily, maybe as a friendly, the section 4 from George's, section 3, sorry, of George's amendment, I think is also a good add. So if you take that as, which says, council directs city manager to send a copy of this to the governor and the state legislative delegation, I think that's a good add as well. If you take that as a friendly,
I take that.
and I'm the second, so. I'd second.
No, we're actually back to your motion, and she's amending.
She's amending the motion. Yeah, and I seconded the amendment.
And then he's amending my amendment, which I.
Friendly amendment.
It's a friendly amendment. You can't amend an amendment.
Okay.
And the second, which is me, accepts it.
Okay, all right, oh my gosh.
I feel like parliamentarian all of a sudden.
And Glenn is coming up with language for us. Any other discussion? Okay.
So then my suggestion is at the end of section 1, before the period, after the word resolution, the following words are added: provided that current video lottery proceeds for local economic development are maintained. And then add a new section 2, which would read, the city council directs the city manager to send a copy of this resolution to Governor Kate Brown and the local state legislative delegation. And what had been section 2 is renumbered to section 3.
That works.
Okay, Betty?
Well, doesn't that weaken the proposal to allow a certain amount of money? If you say provided that weakens it, I think.
Caveat.
It says if you can, instead of
It's
direct
asking
that
for a
they do it.
specific amount. Right. Yeah,
Was it the lottery backed bonds are they coming from the video lottery?
See, this is the part that was my questions.
that we don't-
Because if they're not, then it doesn't really matter.
doesn't really matter, right?
But I still like the statement that we want to protect them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so are we
So
good
there's a
to
motion
vote on this motion
to amend.
to amend? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and opposed? 1. It passes.
So now you're back to the main motion as amended.
So now we're back to the main motion as amended. Are we ready to vote on that? All in favor of the main motion as amended? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, 6. Okay, 6 in favor, opposed? 1. Okay, it passes. Thank you all very much.
Took 20 minutes, not
20 minutes. You said 17. That was pretty good. 20 minutes. Okay, that's pretty good. Thank you. And now,
Right.
the topic we've all been waiting for, and I will turn this over to City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mia or Jason? I'll turn over to Jason.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Jason Dedrick in the City Manager's Office. What I'm going to do is give you a brief overview of the contents of your packet related to some work that an ad hoc committee did back in January and February. So just kind of to bring you up to date, process-wise, you may recall from your November 14th meeting that you passed a resolution declaring the city's commitment to being a welcoming, inclusive, and safe community. That resolution 5174 is attached in your packet, so you can refer to that. In response to continued interest from the community around that issue, on your December 12th meeting, you directed the mayor to form an ad hoc committee to look further into that issue and to return with some outcomes that might be considered for a potential ordinance. So that is the work that the committee has done, and that we will briefly summarize for you today. So that work, that direction came from you to Mayor Piercy. She put together a list of folks who would serve on that committee. Again, that committee met twice, once in January and once in late January and once in early February. Again, the work of that committee was to develop outcomes for a potential ordinance. And what they did throughout the course of those 2 meetings, as well as in between those meetings, was to develop language and then agree unanimously on that language that you now have in your packet as attachment B. One thing I'd like to briefly mention, on the first page there of attachment B, you'll see the names of the community members who served on that committee. I just want to thank them for their work and their time, both at the meeting as well as in between meetings. They did a great job of working collaboratively in a respectful manner, always offering good suggestions and solutions. Staff were there as a resource, and they took advantage of that resource, again, at meetings and in between meetings. So I just wanted to thank them for their time and their efforts. As you'll see there in attachment B, there are really 2 aspects to what that committee has put forward in front of you. The first was the primary intent of their work, which was to develop a list of outcomes that any potential ordinance would accomplish, or in their opinion, any potential ordinance should accomplish. So you'll see that there spread across the first and second pages. There are 5 outcomes. I'm not going to go into detail on those, but they did a great job with the language, with building on existing state statute, and with thinking about how you should be as robust as possible in your approach to potential language. In addition to those 5 primary outcomes, they also had a few additional comments and considerations as you or staff consider a potential ordinance, so those are there for your reference as well. So that's the work that the committee did. Again, they received a draft of this and unanimously supported this document. So that is direct from them to you. The last piece that I want to mention process-wise is that last fall, in addition to the input you were receiving around this issue, Human Rights Commission was also receiving a significant amount of community interest, both at their meetings and public comment, as well as online and other testimony that was submitted. So at their November meeting, the Human Rights Commission established a subcommittee to look into drafting some potential language for an ordinance, should you consider doing that. And so they then reconvened at their December meeting and voted to approve draft ordinance language. So you'll see in your packet attached as attachment C is that proposed language from the Human Rights Commission. That language tracks closely with the outcomes that the ad hoc committee developed, although they were done in separation from each other. So really attachment C there is for your reference or for the reference of staff should you move forward with a potential ordinance. So that pretty much summarizes that kind of the work to date on this issue, as well as the work of the subcommittee. Obviously, Mayor Vinnis was a part of that group, so she can speak to any questions you may have around the process or the content that they worked on. Thank you.
Mayor, there's a second part to the presentation. I wanted to give you a brief overview of sort of the legal framework so that as you're talking about these, perhaps some of the misconceptions that have been out in the media can be clarified. There are issues that have come up related to federal law, state law, and then there's also a local piece to this. The federal law that is actually in play is Section 1373 of the Immigration Code, and the most relevant part of that states that the federal government, the state government, the local government, a local government may not prohibit or in any way restrict any governmental entity or official, and here's the key language, from sending to or receiving from the Immigration and Naturalization Service information regarding the citizenship or immigration status of any individual. So what the federal law prohibits is, whether it's a state official, a local official, from sending information related to immigration status to the INS. Nothing in federal law requires a state or local official to actually collect information. So that's the federal piece. State law, the main section related to this is ORS 181A.820, and it basically says that no law enforcement agency, whether it's of the state or any political subdivision, may use monies, equipment, or personnel for purposes of detecting or apprehending persons whose only violation of law is that they are persons of foreign citizenship present in the United States in violation of federal immigration laws. That state statute is entirely consistent with the federal law. Federal law says if requested and you have information, you have to provide it. State law simply says don't go try to apprehend or detect people, and implicit in that is don't collect this kind of information. Locally, the city manager, I think it was last November, adopted an administrative order that took that state statute that applied just to law enforcement and said to the rest of the organization, we don't want any other city employee, non-law enforcement employee, collecting this kind of information either, or trying to detect people who are in this country illegally. So you have that piece. In terms of what the ad hoc committee did, I'll just give you a quick summary of those 5 outcomes. The first outcome is to take that state statute that I just referred to, the 181A.820, and put that into city code. The second outcome is to take that same state statute, put it into city code, but apply it to all city employees. So basically those first 2 outcomes are what's currently in state law and the city manager's administrative order. The third outcome is to take another state statute, which provides that no law enforcement agency may collect or maintain information about the political, religious, or social views, associations, or activities of any individual group or association. So the third outcome is take that state statute, put it into city code. The fourth proposed outcome is take that same state statute, apply it to the organization as a whole. If you take part of that state statute and say it's going to apply to the rest of the city, there aren't any implications related to that. And the part that I'm referring to is the part that says we can't collect or maintain information about the political, religious, or social views. But the reality is we do collect information about the activities of individuals. Every time somebody checks out a book at the library, every time somebody signs up for a Parks and Rec course or something like that, we are collecting information about those activities. So the fourth outcome, proposed outcome, part of it could be added to something, applied to the city as a whole if it just relates to prohibiting collecting information about political, religious, or social views. But there are potential implications if you expanded that beyond to also include the piece about activities and associations. And so we wouldn't want you to direct that until we had an opportunity to really evaluate what those potential implications are and give that information back to you. The fifth proposed outcome is actually taking what's in that particular state statute and applying it to a much broader group, which also then poses potential implications, unintended consequences, and we can't tell you what those are today. And so if you wanted to pursue that proposed outcome, our recommendation would be give us an opportunity to figure out what the implications are and bring that information back to you. If you want to act relatively quickly, hand that out. I have two suggested motions which are different than what's in your packet. The first suggested motion, I'll read it and then I'll explain what it does related to the proposed outcomes that you receive from the ad hoc committee. So the first suggested motion is to direct the city manager to bring back to council a proposed, and Alan will need to choose ordinance or resolution, that A, adopts the provisions of ORS 181A 820 and 181A 250 related to law enforcement personnel. So that's proposed outcomes 1 and 3. B, expands the applicability of ORS 181A 820 to cover all other city employees. So that's the proposed outcome number 2. And then C, prohibits all other city employees from collecting or maintaining information about the political, religious, or social views of individuals. So that's part of proposed outcome number 4. The second motion would be direct us to bring back information about either the other proposed outcomes or anything else that you would want back. And that one just reads, I move to direct the city manager to schedule a work session to bring back information and potential implications of the following concepts, and then you would just have to list what those concepts were. If you direct us if you adopt basically the first motion, and you do that today, that is something that we can have on your council meeting for March 13th for a public hearing. The title to that was due about half an hour ago. We can get that done this afternoon. So that ordinance, because we're just basically taking state law and putting it into ordinance, we can get done quickly. You could have your public hearing if you wanted to before your break and if you wanted to act before your break. If you wanted to make it broader than that, we won't be able to do it before your break because we need to have a chance to look at what the potential implications are and bring that back to you. So that's why I split it out the way I did. So if you choose to act quickly, here's an option that would allow you to act before your break.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Very helpful. All right. I have in the queue Mike and then Betty.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be proud to support the first motion on this that you suggested. Because our job is to tell you what to bring back, I want to tell you a little bit about why I feel this way. In this chair, I serve in a nonpartisan office, but I'm a member of a political party, and I think my party is largely wrong on this issue, and I've said so before. For me, I'm in favor of a very robust effort to protect and to make sure it works properly our criminal justice system. But when it comes to someone whose only violation is that they snuck in here to our country so that they can work really hard and have a chance at a decent life and so that their kids have a chance at not dying, I'm pretty okay with that. I call that person probably a good neighbor that I'd like to have. So as much as it is against the law, and that's important as an issue to me, that they would have broken the law to do so. I've broken the law before, caught and not caught, and I've done things that are worse than that. So from my perspective, it's the scale of that violation. Now, criminals are a different matter who've broken much more serious laws. I feel differently about that. And as far as the third outcome that's measured in the other part of this, I'm kind of an originalist when it comes to issues around the law. And Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1801 a letter to a bunch of dudes called the Danbury Baptists. And in that, he used the phrase that there is and ought to be a line and a wall of separation between church and state. But it was later in that letter that he kind of outlined the importance of it, which is the right of conscience. And one of the other things he said in that letter was that governments should concern themselves with actions only and never beliefs. And to me, that's a pretty critical bit of instruction. And I just want to say that anybody who would want to collect lists of people based on their beliefs will find me fighting tooth and nail and like a man on fire with every legal means I have available to me, because I think it's a really bad idea. So, in as far as I also want to say, though, I think it's really stupid for us to poke our fingers intentionally in the federal government's eye right now. I think they're very set on doing what they intend on doing, and this is a very elegant way in motion number one of addressing the actual things we intend to do to protect people and to do it gracefully. And I'm in favor.
Thank you. Betty?
Thank you. Well, the reason I first raised my hand was when it's no longer relevant, when Jason was praising the committee members, I wanted him to really read their names for the benefit of people who are listening. But maybe he could still do that. But I want to say, since I do have the floor, that I do favor the way the motions that Glenn has presented. And even though I won't be in town when you have the hearing, I don't object to your acting, because I think that it will go the right way, and I would vote just like the rest of the people. Thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. Well, I have a lot to say on this, so I might need a second round. I really appreciate Councilor Clark's framing of this. I lived in this country for the first 18 years of my life as a legal permanent resident with a green card. And I became a U.S. citizen by choice when I turned 18 and took an oath to defend the country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, as well as the Constitution. So this is a very personal issue for me. And having lived under that status, I recognize how capricious and wrought with racial bias our current immigration system is. So this idea that there's a mythical line that people can line up on to get into the country legally is untrue. And we also have a lot of immigrant myths about our immigrant neighbors, whether they are here with or without legal status, that they don't pay taxes, they take advantage of social services, they take jobs from native-born folks, all of which are patently false. Folks do pay taxes. Legal permanent residents can't even get social services until they've been here for 5 years, and undocumented immigrants have no access to any social services, as far as I know. I think the only thing they can access in terms of public service is K through 12 education. So as Councilor Clark mentioned, these are our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, people who clean our offices, prepare our food, bus our tables, and harvest our crops. And they deserved better than to be treated like dangerous criminals, deprived of basic constitutional protections, and made to live in fear of law enforcement. So we've received some very good information from our city attorney that this proposals we have before us would not violate any federal law. Oregon has had a prohibition on local law enforcement acting in the capacity of a federal immigration officer since 1987. So in addition, we are a home rule city and a sovereign state and have the absolute legal right to determine how we want our local resources used. And the federal government cannot require us to use our local police or librarians or other city staff to do their work. So I do think it's important for us to take this action locally, as it will send a message to our community that we are committed to providing as much protection as legally possible to our immigrant community. And it ensures that if any action is taken at the state level to undermine these protections, we would still have them in place here in Eugene. We've received many emails and public comments supporting this action, and only a handful in opposition. On the specifics, I'm very supportive of the first intended motion that the city attorney has provided with us, and I hope that we will pass that today.
Thank you. Alan.
Yeah, a couple of questions first. Is being here in violation of U.S. or federal immigration laws a criminal offense?
Civil.
I think it's civil. I don't know for sure.
Violation. That's my understanding as well. So I'll operate under that. And so when it says in the documents, unless it's in regard to a criminal offense. So in order to be use our law enforcement to enforce a criminal offense, there needs to be a warrant for their arrest, which means they have to go through the judicial process and do the due process and have probable cause and all those things to get the warrant and arrest somebody.
I'm not sure what scenario you're referring to. Well, let me just ask, are you talking about if the Immigration Service asks for our help, or
Yes.
Yes. So, yes, if the Immigration
That's the
Service...
exclusion. It has to be unless it's in regard to a criminal offense. But for that to be the case, there has to be a warrant, which involves all the other judicial process.
Right. There are parts of the federal government that have taken the position that the Immigration Service can issue what are called detainers or detainer requests. A number of courts across the country have said those aren't valid because there isn't basically it's an arrest warrant without calling it that. Mm-hmm. And so a number of courts have said they're not valid, and if a local or state official actually detains someone based on that, then they can be sued for violating the Fourth Amendment, and the federal government has refused to indemnify local or state officials if they actually comply with those detainer requests, and the state or local official then gets sued. So, long answer, but yes, if we are doing something on behalf of another entity, there needs to be a warrant. If we actually observe a crime, we can arrest somebody without a warrant. That would be the exception.
So we're not talking about criminals. We're talking about people who are here in violation of federal immigration laws, which is a criminal offense. Okay. So,
correct.
So we're not talking about criminals. We're just talking about people who are illegal immigrants. And there's an option of an ordinance or resolution. The ordinance becomes city law. Resolution is not. Ordinance requires a public hearing. Resolution does not, but we could do one for resolution if we wanted to.
Right. So those are the major differences, and the other difference is in order to change an ordinance, if the council adopts these protections by ordinance, in order for a future council to change, a future council also would need to go through the public hearing process. If you adopt it by resolution, a future council can change it by resolution.
Yeah.
Which means no public hearing, as they choose.
And should the state repeal ORS 181A, we would still have that on our books.
Correct.
As a local Eugene law.
Correct. Nothing in the ordinance would be tied to the existence of the state law.
Okay. So my mother was an immigrant, and my father was a first-generation immigrant of immigrant parents. So I think immigrants deserve to be treated with respect, and I agree with what Councilor Clark said and eloquently, and what Councilor Syrett said. I agree with both of those, so I won't belabor that point. But I do believe this whole movement to clamp down on immigrants is based in racism. And I object to that on a fundamental basis. So I'll be in favor of supporting and putting forward as a motion, the first motion that you put forward as an ordinance.
Great. Chris.
Thank you. as the person who was involved in this early on, I was on the Human Rights Commission when the big meeting was in November, and I was very moved by the number of people that came and spoke, and was the person who suggested to Mayor Piercy that we create this committee so that we could come up with good ordinance language that would do what we really wanted to do. And so for that, I'm incredibly appreciative of the committee and the hard work they did to try to craft ordinance provisions that would do exactly what it is that we need to do. And so with that in mind, I think the outcome that we've had so far, both with the committee outcomes and the way those are then to be turned into an ordinance, I think is following the right process, one that is a due process and provides the protections that I was looking for all along. Because I think in my role as a Eugene City Councilor, it is to protect and defend the people of Eugene. Not just the homeowners, not just the men, not just the people who have beards, but all people in Eugene. And so, yeah, see, already we're starting to break out into our subgroups. That's why it has to be all people in Eugene.
I'm the only man out of the beard here.
And at the same time, I appreciate the fact that what we're trying to craft is something that does that, but doesn't intentionally poke the bear and try to create a political statement that is not the role of a city government to do. So that balancing that fine line, I think, is very important, that we do protect and defend our people. And that, for me, is what we're trying to achieve here. And I appreciate the committee, I think, was trying to do that as well, which is why I think their work was so well-grounded. And so from that standpoint, I think getting some more information on unintended consequences and what those might be is definitely a very thoughtful way to go. And that as far as we can go as quickly as we can with these measures, which I do think are thoughtful and deliberate, I think is fine. And I'm very supportive, as everybody else here has said.
Emily, I'll let you go first. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. George, you're next on my list.
Thank you. Yeah, I can support the first motion as presented. Basically, what that's doing is reaffirming our long-standing applications of state, federal laws, local ordinances and policies, procedures, whether they're formal or informal, and administrative rules. And it's codifying all of that to protect people. Plain and simple. That's all we're doing. It's something we've done for years. It's just that we're bringing it into a city ordinance and codifying it and saying this is the city of Eugene's position on these issues. So I'm good with the suggested first motion moving forward.
Emily?
Thank you. I think that if we're going to do this, it needs to be an ordinance. Otherwise, it's just a placating proclamation, and we already have enough of those. So let's make it an ordinance. I agree with the first motion. I will point out that nowhere in these words does it say sanctuary city. And I think it's wise to not have that in an ordinance, since it will be caught right in the president's newsfeed. But I also know that everyone has asked for sanctuary city, and I would assume that it will be referred to as that. I'm okay with that, but I think we should be aware of it.
Thank you. Second round, Claire?
Thank you. So I had a question for Glenn. If we go ahead and adopt this first of your proposed suggested motions instead of doing a second work session, can you identify some of the things we might not be taking up in terms of recommendations from the ad hoc committee?
So this basically is 3.5 of the 5 proposed outcomes. Their fourth proposed outcome was to take the state statute that said law enforcement shall not collect information about political, religious, social beliefs, associations, activities. It applies that, the proposed outcome applied that across the city organization. What this does is to say we're going to take the first half of that, the part that says we shall not collect information or maintain information about political, religious, or social beliefs, and we're going to say we're not doing that anywhere in the city. The part of the state law that talks about associations or activities, that wouldn't be encompassed in this, because that's where I don't know what those unintended consequences are. I gave you a couple of examples, like we know we're collecting information on activities because library card, Parks and Rec, you sign up for those things, we have that information. I'm not sure what else we may be doing that we're doing because you all or your predecessors have said, great programs, go do it. And so before trying to incorporate that into an ordinance, we would want you to know what those are, and I can't give you that information today. So that piece isn't part of this motion. And then the other piece that's not part of this motion is their fifth proposed outcome, which is saying, let's expand the political, religious, social beliefs to anything related to a number of different categories. Gender, I can't remember what's in it, but it's that list of other categories. And there, too, I don't know what the unintended consequences would be. Certainly when people fill out forms for the city, we ask male, female. We collect information about disabilities in order to be able to provide services to people with disabilities. So we would need to look at what those unintended consequences, what the implications are of that fifth one. So 3.5 of the proposed outcomes are embedded in that first motion. To the extent that you wanted to continue to look at the second half of the fourth outcome and the fifth outcome, that's what the second motion could be used for, is direct us to come back with that information. It will take some time. That wouldn't happen before your spring recess.
Thank you. Well, I think it's important that we act quickly on the main pieces of this. So I'm supporting the first suggested motion. But I think it's important for us to be cognizant that there may be some other activities that this federal government decides to take up in the future that we may want to revisit some of these expanded protections. But I do have concerns about, operational aspects like our downtown court, the community court, but the CORT team that's trying to coordinate social services for folks who are chronic users and living on the streets. And we need to, in some cases, create a list so that we can go back to those folks and try to get them help. And those are very positive activities that we have that I wouldn't want to be implicated by a hasty decision on our part. So I'm just raising that up, that we may at some point be back at this table discussing additional protections. But I think right now taking this action on the 3.5 recommendations is prudent and should go forward.
Great. And Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. The first statements I made were kind of strong. I kind of want to flavor that a little bit more with some stuff. Well, no, not really walk it back. No, I wouldn't say that. Although the first one is somewhat of a caveat. If we had insisted on titling this a sanctuary city ordinance, I would vote no. Because I have no desire to stick my finger in the eye of the federal government. I think it's unwise to do that. We're talking about an awful lot of money that I think this city uses well to help people. And I think that would just be dumb. So I know how the media works. I've been in this business for a while, and they'll probably call it that. I don't doubt that they'll say that's what we passed. So I need to say out loud that that's not what I passed. What I voted in favor of today was something that other people that see the world more like I do, more conservatively maybe, I think can understand. This isn't about immigration. This is about separation of powers. This says that's not our job. Now, I do think it's the federal government's job, and I think they've been doing it badly for a long time, and I think they ought to do it better, but that's a whole other conversation. But this says we don't do that here. Here we patch roads and potholes, and we make sure red trucks and blue cars show up when you dial 911, and we don't do that stuff. And this is specifically why. And this says we don't collect lists of people that you're interested in because we don't do that here. And so to those who see the world maybe in a different way than our council majorities does sometimes, maybe more like me, I'd encourage you to consider it that way, because in that way I think you could support it too. Even further, I would say that my grandfather's name was Nordal Grostad, and he came to the United States from Norway in the early 1930s. The funny part is, Nobody in my family knows whether he did it legally or illegally at all. And so I often think, does that, if he had done it illegally, does that make me less American? You know, I mean, I don't know. I would urge some caution, though. I don't mean to pick on Alan, though it's so much fun and it's so easy. But I don't think that many people who are conservative or Republican who see this issue as strongly and important in their world. Many who see many other issues like I do, who think this is a very important issue. I know many of them. Many of them are good friends who see the world that way. And I know many of them that don't see it that way based on racism. They see it that way based on respect for the law. That's in their heart and minds the truth. Now, I disagree with them about the importance of being that intense about respect for the law for this one. But I do know that's how they see it, and I don't want to call them names for it. But I do urge them to see, as I said at the beginning, that that's exactly what this ordinance does, clarify our local law, and it's a good thing.
Thank you. Alan?
I agree that not everyone who agrees with the president is a racist, but I do believe many have support that action that he's calling for come from a motivation of racism, and some of them cloak it in being strongly in favor of all the laws. So I agree with you, Mike. Not everybody fits into that category. In Part C of the motion that prohibits all other city employees from collecting or maintaining information about the political, religious, or social views of individuals, I think it's in reaction to the remarks of the president about creating lists or registries of Muslims, which is downright wrong, and we should not do it. We just had the 75th anniversary of the internment of Japanese in this country, which was a very, very dark day in our history, and I don't believe we should ever do that again. And that's the road we're heading down, I believe. Calling it a sanctuary city or not is purely semantics. I don't think it makes a bit of difference in effect, because if I were advising the president, I would just include a laundry list of all the different things that people have called this, whether it be Chicago or San Francisco, where they call it welcoming or inclusive city. We have a resolution that says we're a welcoming, inclusive city. I would just go down and catch all of those, and so I don't think it really would make any difference at all what we end up calling it, and I don't think we would escape anything by not calling it that, calling ourselves a sanctuary city. Beside that, it's the common term, and everybody's been calling it that, so it doesn't bother me that if that were the title of this. Mr. City Attorney, what's your opinion about, you think it makes any difference what you call it? Or is it just going to be semantics?
Well, to the extent it helps, let me tell you sort of how the federal government, in a sense, has defined it, and the way they have defined it, we would not be one. So the executive order that started this back in January 30th about the immigration issues, including sanctuary jurisdictions, what that executive order says in part is that the Attorney General, meaning the U.S. Attorney General, shall ensure that jurisdictions that willfully refuse to comply with 8 U.S.C. 1373 sanctuary jurisdictions. So this executive order defines a sanctuary jurisdiction, which could be a city, a state, a county, as one that is willfully refusing to comply with Section 1373, and Section 1373 is the one I started with. That's the one that says we cannot refuse to provide information, if requested, about the immigration status of somebody. We are not willfully refusing, we're not refusing at all to comply with that statute. We don't have the information to provide, so there isn't any information to provide, so we're neither willfully nor accidentally, negligently refusing to comply. We are actually complying, or at least our actions are consistent. So there's nothing about Motion 1 which, if the federal government actually used the definition that they have in that executive order, there's nothing about what Motion 1 does, that would classify us as a sanctuary jurisdiction. So the real answer to your question is, are we a sanctuary city? It depends on who's defining the term. There is no legal definition of that term. For purposes of what this administration has done, they have, in a sense, defined it as a jurisdiction that's willfully refusing to comply. That's not what this motion does. That's not what the ordinance would do.
Could the federal government order or compel us to collect that information?
Could they lawfully order? No. 2 reasons. First, the federal laws don't currently give the federal government the authority to do that, and that's not what Section 1373 says, and no other federal statute says that. Second, if Congress decided to amend the statutes to try to, in essence, conscript state and local governments to do that, then the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says, at least there are federal court cases, including U.S. Supreme Court cases, that we would argue say they don't get to do that. Immigration is a federal issue, is a federal obligation. The 10th Amendment is there to protect states and local governments from being forced to basically act as sort of the minions of the federal government. Somebody said, I can't remember who, we're a sovereign state. That's the nature of the U.S. Constitution. So I believe the answer is no. They can't do it today because federal law doesn't authorize it. If Congress tried to amend the law, then they would be challenged all across the country by states and local governments saying you're violating the 10th Amendment.
Right, and on a practical level, an impact, I don't believe it's the job of the city government to use its resources to do another federal agency's or any other agency's job. So it's not our job to enforce the EPA rules. It's not our job to enforce the immigration rules or any of those things. That there are, and so using our resources for that is just inappropriate. Final question related to federal funds that would be at risk. My understanding is that the federal funds need to be directly related to the issue at hand, so they can't just necessarily take away CDBG money or traffic money or highway money as it relates to an immigration issue. Can you explain that a little bit more, please?
Sure. So there are, again, U.S. Supreme Court cases that have said that Congress can tie the receipt of federal funds to compliance with federal laws. But it's not receipt of all federal dollars to compliance with every federal law. Instead, it's dollars related to the specific federal law that one might be violating. So, for example, the recent case with the Affordable Care Act, there was a threat to cut off a state's Medicaid funding, at least a small portion of the Medicaid funding, if a state didn't comply with the Medicaid Act. There was a close tie there for part of it, but the intent or the directive, we're going to cut off all of this funding, no, that was trying to coerce a state into doing something. So there has to be a nexus between the law that we might be violating, the federal law that we might be violating, and the source of those funds. The cases, I believe, U.S. Supreme Court, appellate court cases, would say if the federal government tried to cut off a city or a state's federal funding entirely because the state actually willfully refused to comply with Section 1373, the courts would say, no, you can't do that. If a state is getting immigration funds, then the federal government probably can cut off those immigration funds for failure to comply with immigration laws. But to cut off their CDBG, no, the federal government doesn't have that authority. And that's based on the Constitution. It's the spending power clause of the U.S. Constitution.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that. Final statement is I'm interested in moving this forward before the break and as fast as possible. And so the second motion, unless there's a overwhelming desire by the council, I wasn't going to put that on the table at this time.
There we go.
Okay. Chris, do you have a, well, but this is his third round, so.
Yes,
yeah.
Keeping track of the rounds, yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
I'm intrigued by the conversation about what to call this thing. I mean, to me, my focus is on what it does, not what you call it. And I think that is interesting because when the mayor and I was canvassing a couple of weeks ago, this was the topic everybody in the neighborhood wanted to talk about. And I think the interesting aspect is, while there is no definition of what a sanctuary city is, I think there's a term of common use, which is historical in nature. I mean, in the old days, particularly with regard to churches, if you committed a crime and you went into a church, you had sanctuary and the police couldn't follow you. And I think that's what people's interpretation of sanctuary means. You can do anything you want to, and then once you go into a sanctuary location, you're free from prosecution. And that would be absolutely 100% wrong in terms of what we're talking about doing here. And so other people can use the term sanctuary, but that really is not what we're doing. And my concern about using the concept of sanctuary is we are not protecting criminal behavior. And I think it does not help us or the proponents for this idea to think that we are trying to protect criminal behavior, because we're not. We're simply trying to protect people from unreasonable persecution based on no other reason than their immigration status. And that was where the genesis of this came from. And so that's why I'm supportive of acting on this and acting on it quickly, but not getting caught up in the term of art in terms of what we call it. And I think it also goes back to the notion of, if we don't call it sanctuary by anybody's definition, and based on what you said, it's not even the federal definition, that is a way we can provide the protections and the defense that I'm looking for without poking the bear. I don't need to poke the bear. Housing and urban development funds for low-income housing are grants. They're not required federal funding. And if we want to be able to receive grants to pay for low-income housing, we want to ensure that we don't poke the bear, but still provide the defense. And I think this is an opportunity for us to be able to thread that line in a very appropriate and effective way. And so from that standpoint, I'm supportive of us trying to provide these protections, but I'm not interested in trying to come up with a label that satisfies people but creates a provocation that isn't really necessary.
George.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a little over 2 pages of a list of the federal dollars that we received last year, and it's divided up into 2 categories. One is grants, and the other one is what's called direct program funds. Is there anybody here, or can you supply me an answer at a later time, which of the direct program funds that the city of Eugene receives are mandated, such as the Medicare funds?
We'd have to get back to you on that. We don't have that information readily.
I would just like to know, because I know the grants, the monies that are issued on grants are on a competitive basis, and I think there's all kinds of ways that, if not properly used, a requesting agency for grants could be put at the bottom of the list, depending on how many requests and how much money there is. So, I'd like to find out how, if anybody knows, how the direct program funds are delegated or issued out to the different cities and states and counties.
Yeah, we'll have to do a little bit of research on that.
Thank you.
Mike, third round.
Thank you, Mayor. This is why what we call it is so important to me, and Chris just did a really great job of opening up that that topic the way I see it. I can barely think of a more important time in the history of our country for respect for the rule of law. And we've talked around that just a minute ago. I don't want us to become a, quote, sanctuary city, where even if there's a warrant out for someone whose sole violation is immigration in nature, I want us to respect that warrant, and this allows that, because that's the rule of law. And the reason I don't want to poke my finger at the federal government and say, we're a sanctuary city and we're going to defy you. I don't want to defy the federal government. I want to appropriately separate what should be our job and what should be their job. And that's what we've done. The reason I don't want to is because once one body of government starts defying another body of government, that's where the chaos starts. I think the city attorney is 100% right that the federal government would lose in court if they denied us funds over specific issues like it's been discussed. But that assumes two things. Number one, it assumes that that court case would be done soon, and I bet it drags on for at least a couple of years before that money ever comes to us, once we won. And that assumes that the federal administration would abide by what the court says. Because once some levels of government start defying others, why shouldn't he defy the courts? In my opinion, I'll say it again, there could not be a more important time for us to focus on the importance of equal application and the rule of law. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, speaking of chaos, I'm not sure what this administration is going to do with this. They walked back and reversed so many different things. It's unclear to me. But I do know we won't be alone going down this road. Many states and cities have already taken this path, and with large resources, City of Chicago, San Francisco, and the entire state of California. In fact, the state of California apparently has hired former Attorney General Holder as the as their attorney to represent them on this funding issue of representing funding. I think maybe Mr. City Attorney, you could talk to some of the strategies about how they might go after cities that do this, and whether or not we'd be a target versus, say, the state of California or Chicago versus some small town like Eugene. And then finally, I don't necessarily care what we call it. I don't think it makes any difference. People are going to call it Sanctuary City regardless of what we do. So if we Sanctuary City. So if we were to use language that would help some people get behind it, or in some bizarre circumstance prevent us from losing grants, then that's fine with me too.
So the ordinance that we prepare, if you pass this motion, will not label it as anything. The ordinance will say, here are the protections. This is what, whether it's EPD or other city employees, may not do. And so it doesn't need a label. In an ordinance, labels actually confuse things, because at times a court may look at that and say, I think the label means this, but the specifics over here sort of say something else. I don't want there to be any confusion in the ordinance as to what it does. So generally, we don't have labels with ordinances. So this one wouldn't have a label. In terms of strategy, I don't know who's advising the administration or the U.S. Department of Justice, so I'm not sure what their strategies will be. There's really two very different ones, depending on what their goals are. One strategy is you go after the biggest fish in the pond, and which might be San Francisco, it might be the state of California, it might be the state of New York City, Chicago, because you operate under the theory that if we can beat them, then every other city and state is simply going to fall in line. And so it makes your work a lot less. You don't have hundreds of lawsuits. You deal with the ones that they believe everybody else would follow. The other very different strategy is they pick on the smallest, hoping that the smallest jurisdictions will be unable to actually defend themselves. They get a couple court victories, and so they start with this cycle of court victories, and they just keep trying to build on that until they got court victories across the United States. Now they go after the big fish. In the end, I don't think it really matters, because cities and states are going to be coordinating. They're already are coordinating. There are amicus efforts for jurisdictions which have either filed suit or have joined other jurisdictions. The one that put on hold part of the executive order that was in the news a couple weeks ago, originally filed by the state of Washington, joined by, I think it was the state of Minnesota. A number of other states have said they're willing to jump in. And a number of jurisdictions have said, hey, if you want amicus support, let us know, and will provide amicus support. So in the end, I think all the resources are going to be the same, at least from the state and local government side.
Claire, one more round?
Sure. Just in response to some of the other comments, I frankly would be happy to poke this bear. I think it needs some poking. And a reminder that America is a republic comprised of sovereign states. I was the one who mentioned that earlier. And we can't be dictated to by the executive branch of the federal government. Home rule in this case. But that said, I am not concerned what we title this ordinance. I think the content is what's important, and that it's legally defensible, and that it accomplishes the goals that we've outlined here. And I feel confident that what our city attorney will bring back for a public hearing will do that.
Okay, I think we're just about ready for, do we have another? But I want to take just one turn here. And first of all, I want to thank the members of the committee, Phil Carrasco, Dave Fidanki, Ibrahim Hamide, Ken Newbeck, Bonnie Sousa, and then I sat on that committee. And I want to thank staff, Jason Diedrich, for really orchestrating those meetings, city attorney and other staff support, because I think you all have enabled us to have a really well-informed conversation, to feel very grounded in this decision, to recognize where there are things we might still need to explore and develop. And so I'm grateful to all of you for helping us have a really rational, sensible, supportive process here, because it's a charged issue. And I do want to put my pitch in that we do look at the next level at some pay, because we do have community members who are very anxious about where they may be vulnerable to other lists or registries. And so that's my pitch, is that we keep going and stay on top of this issue, that this may not be the final chapter for the city. Okay, that said, are we ready for a motion?
Proud to put this motion forward. I move to direct the city manager to bring back a council proposed ordinance that A, adopts provisions of ORS 181A.820 and 181A.250 related to law enforcement personnel. B, expands the applicability of ORS 181A.820 to cover all other city employees. And C, prohibits all other city employees from collecting or maintaining information about the political, religious, or social views of individuals.
I second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in favor, and none opposed. So it is passed, and congratulations. That's terrific. Terrific. Thank you so much. And that closes our work session.